Hello and welcome to this Astranti pre-scene video series taking a look at the November 2022 and February 2023 Strategic Case Study exam looking at Hottayr, company that produces primarily boilers and heat pumps for residential properties. Before we begin, just going to give you a brief introduction into who I am and also how we are going to conduct this analysis. My name is Peter Steth and I'm the Senior Strategic Case Study Tutor here at Astranti and also the Masterclass Tutor for those of you who are on the course. And I have many years experience teaching the case study exam, including teaching the operational and management case study. So how it's going to work with this pre-scene analysis, we're going to look at the pre-scene section by section, identifying the key points and also applying relevant business models from the CIMA syllabus. We'll also be bringing up likely exam issues and some hints and tips for the exam day as well, looking at things that students often do that's incorrect or things that they do that they are correct, etc. And then we'll look at the strategic analysis, which is where we add in all those different CIMA models and apply them to the case, and also our top 10 most likely unseen issues. And what we'll do as we go through the pre-scene analysis is I'll assume that you have no prior knowledge. So I'm going to assume that when you are looking at a particular paragraph in the pre-scene during this analysis series, it's the first time you've ever seen it. We're not going to be applying knowledge from later in the pre-scene, retrospectively. We're not going to be applying material from the industry analysis, etc. We're going to look at it as if it's the first time we've seen it. Other than, of course, the CIMA syllabus. We'll be applying prior knowledge of the CIMA syllabus to the material. And we'll look through each section, make some notes on it, come back and we'll go through it together using my review. And some notes on the pre-scene. The point of them is to give you context. Because most of you watching this video who are taking the strategic case study exam will not be in exactly the same position as the senior manager in the case, which of course is the role that we are playing. You probably work in a different job, in a different industry, etc. You have no idea about their specific industry, or at least you may not have a very good idea about it. But of course, in the exam, you're expected to answer as if you were a senior manager in that specific industry. So the point of the pre-scene is to give you enough background information so that you can make recommendations based on the organization's strategic position and based on what is logical and common within the industry. But do not write anything based on the pre-scene, or at least pre-write any answers based on the pre-scene, because ultimately you are being examined on your ability to answer the questions in the unseen on the exam day, which might be different than the material in the pre-scene. It might go down a different route. It might even contradict it. But if you just focus on writing answers based on the pre-scene, you won't be answering the questions correctly. So in summary, the pre-scene is there to give you background information. But ultimately in the exam, you are answering questions based on the unseen. So now that we have looked at how we are going to approach the pre-scene and the different things we're going to look out for, now I'm going to take you through the contents of the pre-scene and how the video series itself is going to be structured, the kinds of things that we're going to look at throughout this video series. So in this very first video, we're going to primarily look at the introduction. And you might think, well, there's not going to be that much in the introduction. It's going to be a very quick overview of the organization. But that is not the case. The introduction is actually fundamentally important for your understanding of what is expected of you and the role that you are playing within this organization, because that's going to provide a lot of foundation, a lot of context for everything else that we approach in the pre-scene. So that's going to be the first video, and also in that we will also bring in some key points about the industry, some key models from the strategic CIMA syllabus, things that we will build on, things that we will grow as we progress through the video series. So it's very much a foundation video, this particular one. Then in the next video, what we're going to do is take a look through some of the key components of the central heating system market, and particularly the Norland residential central heating market. So in that video, we'll look at what central heating is, we'll look at what air pumps are and heating pumps are, we'll look at the alternatives to it, such as solar panels, and think about various issues that may come up, may face the industry, things such as political issues, and moving to more environmentally friendly systems for heating is very important. It's a hot button issue at the moment, particularly with everything that's going on with the war in Ukraine and other things such as the cost of living crisis, how that is all affecting heating. It's affecting heating bills. It's putting more and more pressure on the average family, and ways in which that can be dealt with and circumvented. So what I would say here is that whilst that bit is important with regards to us perhaps understanding a bit of the supply chain of the industry and the outlook of the industry, which particular things are more popular, are heat pumps becoming more popular, etc. What I would say there is that CIMA are not going to expect you to be an absolute expert in heat pumps. You're not expected to come away from this being able to build a heat pump and service a heat pump and install a heat pump. We're more understanding the industry from the role of a strategic accountant. The kinds of issues that will affect the industry, that will affect your role as a strategic accountant within Hottayr. Not expecting you to be able to install them yourselves. You're not expected to know the actual engineering side of it. So if you are looking at this pre-scene and worrying about the industry, thinking, oh, this is such a difficult industry, it's such an obscure product and service that is being provided by this organization, I don't know anything about it. Again, you aren't going to be expected to know how a heat pump truly works and the engineering side of it. So just putting your mind at ease if you were worried about that. In video 3, we will then start looking at the company itself, looking at Hottayr, looking at its operations, looking at its history, and that will progress into video 4 as well, where we're looking at the report about the organization, looking at its board of directors, and looking at the various different committees, all those important P3 issues such as governance and good governance. We'll then move on to video 5 to look at the news stories. The news stories are actually very, very important because whilst there isn't a huge amount of information in the news stories alone, what they are often very good for is to suggest potential issues that may come up in the unseen exam. Often some of those news stories from the pre-scene are repurposed as reference material in the unseen exam. So it's likely that there will be at least a couple of questions across the different variants that are based specifically on the sorts of issues that are arising in those news stories. So they are very important. Once we have done that, we'll circle back to the principal risks in video 6 for the specific risk video and finish the pre-scene part of this pre-scene session on the video 7, looking at the competitors' financial statements and also looking at Hottayr's financial statements. And once we have done that, we're not finished. We'll then move on to the other videos, videos 8, 9, and 10, starting with video 8, which is the strategic analysis. So in that one, we'll summarize a lot of the key models for the CIMA syllabus and how they apply to Hottayr. We'll look at where the organization is, where it wants to be, how it's going to get there, and all those different models that will be in that we'll be building on throughout this video series. Things like SWOT models, things like Ansos matrix, things like risks and ethics as well, we'll also look at. We'll then move on to the top 10 most likely unseen issues. And this is based on what we look at in the presim, but is also based on what kinds of questions have often come up in the exam in the past, and also our general knowledge of this exam, having created these video series for many years, since 2015. And generally around 7 to 8 out of the 10 issues that we come up with in our top 10 issues videos do appear in the variants for the unseen exam. And the final video will be the industry analysis. And I'm sure that will be particularly useful for this industry, given that it is quite an obscure one. And in that particular video, what we'll do is we'll do a video looking through our industry pack, looking at the history of the industry, looking at some major players within this industry in the real world, and also we'll have a list of industry examples that you can use in your exam, and also to help broaden your knowledge of the industry. And the CIMA examiner in their examiner's reports has specifically mentioned many times that they prefer and they like when students have used industry examples to help add weight to their analysis, and also just to demonstrate that they've taken this very seriously, that they have put the work in, they've put the research in. And so that will be the conclusion to this video series. So with all that out the way, now let's take a look at the introductory section of the pre-CIMA. And well, essentially what we're going to do here is look at these few paragraphs here and really pull it apart to understand and analyze exactly what our role is going to be, the kinds of things that we are going to need to look out for throughout the rest of this pre-CIMA, and also start bringing in some key points, some key risks, and build some key models as well. So let's begin. So Hottayr is a quoted company that manufactures domestic heating products, mainly gas boilers and air source heat pumps. So you might be looking at that and really glazing over it and thinking, okay, it's a company that makes heating products such as boilers and heat pumps. Okay, fair enough, that's what this organization is. But actually, there's a lot that we can pull out of there that is going to be relevant for you and your role. Keyword here is domestic. So a lot of the products that it produces will be made for domestic homes. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's all going to be business to consumer sales, because we may be selling the products to organizations that then install and are paid for installing heating products. So it doesn't mean it's going to be directly business to consumer. We might be selling to wholesalers, we might be selling to organizations that role is to install these products. But it does mean that the products themselves will be designed for domestic properties. We're not designing enormous products that are designed for heating offices where there are 500 people in. It's for domestic use, for houses. And by identifying that early on, what we've already started to do here is identify some important stakeholders of the organization. And a very important part of being a senior manager, a strategic manager within an organization, is stakeholder management and understanding the wants and the needs of stakeholders. Stakeholders, of course, being anyone affected by the operations of the business. So we've got our buyers there, the various different organizations that might purchase the domestic heating products and the gas boilers, the heat pumps, etc. The staff that work at those organizations, such as the engineers, the installers, the people that are actually going to be going into people's homes and installing these boilers, installing these heat pumps, and also the consumer themselves. They're going to need to rely on the products that we produce. So there's three important stakeholders that we've already identified there. We've also started to build a picture and image of how the organization is likely to operate. Now, of course, further on in the pre-CIMA, we might find out different information, but as I mentioned in that introduction, we're going to look through it as if everything that we're looking at is the first time we have seen it. You can also see that this organization is a quoted company. That means it trades on the stock exchange, and there are various different benefits to that as well. For starters, it implies that we are a relatively large organization. We do have additional sources of finance and funding there that we can ultimately go to the market for finance and funding. And perhaps as well, it demonstrates us as a larger, more sustainable, a more prestigious organization. If you're looking for a job and you're looking at various different organizations, you find there's one that's a very small company that you've never heard of until you started researching jobs. And then you've got one that is a huge, large, multinational organization that trades on the stock market. There's more prestige and perhaps at least a perceived security in working for that company as well. So that's more beneficial with regards to hiring staff, which of course is also a very important stakeholder of the organization. And as with all businesses, staff are very important. You can't run an organization without staff. So those are key strengths of the organization as well, and also will allow us to perhaps gain additional funding, additional finance in the future to invest in new products. And also it's going to give us more cachet with perhaps the government. The reason why I bring that up is governments are always a very big, powerful stakeholder, and also specifically to do with this industry, this is a very political issue at the moment with the rising gas prices and the environmental targets that various governments have put in place. And so the fact that we're a larger company means we're going to have perhaps a better relationship, or at least be able to influence that relationship a lot more than a smaller organization. So I've summarized a few of those key points there. One other thing I would mention as well is if we are a larger organization, known organization, that we must set a good example, particularly in the modern world with social media, where people like to be seen as socially conscious and indeed actively are socially conscious. And therefore, given that this is such an environmental issue, and the cost of using gas boilers, the damage that it perhaps does to the planet as well. Air source heat pumps, whilst they use less of those sorts of fossil fuels, problem they do have is that they use refrigerant gases, similar as in fridges and freezers, etc. And that can as well cause damage to the ozone layer and cause global warming issues. So there's a lot to be considered here, and there's a lot of hot button topics, and of course those can spread like wildfire on social media. So as a larger known organization, we must be seen to set a good example on this issue, not someone that is an organization that is trying to stifle the introduction of more environmentally friendly alternatives just because it's not good for our business. So those are important things to bring up. And that's all important risks as well to consider, is the risk of public perception. So already, just from looking at that one sentence, we've already brought out quite a lot of important information that is going to affect our analysis as we continue to progress, whether that is having funding for investment and growth, whether it's considering our various different stakeholders here. We've already identified staff, government, buyers, their staff, consumers already, and as well as the public themselves, not just the individual consumer part of the public, but the wider public as a whole. So now on to a bit about who we are and the role that we are going to play. We are a senior manager in Hottayr's finance function. Now that's a very, very important thing to remember, that you are playing a role in this exam. You are not looking at it from an outside perspective, from a consultancy perspective, or anything like that. You are a senior manager working in Hottayr's finance function. So you need to act like you are, and you need to answer questions and talk like you are as well, like you are part of this entity. You're not looking at it from afar saying, well, Hottayr could do this and Hottayr could do that. You actively need to talk about it from the we perspective, like, oh, we've had success doing this, one of our strengths is that we're good at this, so we should build upon that strength, etc. We should overcome this weakness, etc. And that's specifically something that's given to you in a preamble by CIMA. And that's something a lot of students don't actually read, and they perhaps don't even realize exists. And in our video series where we're looking at our exam technique guide, we do actively look at the various different components of the role that CIMA has given. But there is a very important distinction. You are not the management accountant student working at whichever company you currently work for. You are a senior manager working in Hottayr's finance function. You report directly to the board and you advise on special projects and strategic matters. So think about your E3 and your E2 here with your project management, with your strategic options. You are advising the board on strategic options. So you need to consider things from an overarching strategy perspective. So a way of thinking about that is to think about things from the longer term. Think about the general movement of the business, the progression of the business, the strategic aims of the business. It's not like at operational management level where you're perhaps more focused on the day-to-day, the operational. You are focusing on the wider strategic matters for the organization. So that's very important that you remember that. You don't get bogged down in the day-to-day operational. And also, an important thing here is you are reporting directly to the board. And therefore, you need to answer the questions, you need to provide information, provide guidance, influence as if you were influencing a board of directors. And so you need to talk in that fashion. You need to provide summarized advice. You need to provide recommendations on what to do. That's something that students often miss out, is providing recommendations, but that is incredibly important here. And within that, you will also need to provide guidance on risks and the financial aspects as well. So knowledge of E3, P3 and F3 is required for the strategic case study exam. And an example I always give to students with regards to influencing and providing recommendations is to think about the board, in this instance, in the same way as you would think about the board of the company you currently work for, or the managing director, the CEO, etc. And think about how you would deal with them. If they said to you, management accountant, please can you provide for me a report that looks at X, Y, and Z? How would you approach that? If they said, come back to me with this report and present it in front of the board of directors, how would you approach that? Would you have a detailed, summarized executive summary of all the key bits of information with your recommendation, and you would present it in that fashion? Or would you print out hundreds of pages of spreadsheet print-offs with details and figures and things like that, all jumbled up, not in any particular order or showing anything as self, just lots of details of figures, and go into the boardroom and just hand it all out, put it on the boardroom table and say, there you go, spend the next 2 days trolling through all these figures and make something of it? Would you do the former or would you do the latter? Now, I'd hope you would do the former. I'm sure all of you would say the former, and that's exactly how you need to approach this. You need to be influential and provide recommendations, and that's something students do not do enough of. If I give you some exam tip, exam guidance there, students do not do enough recommendation and influencing. And on to the final part of the introduction now. Hottayr is based in a country called Norland. And Norland is a developed country that has an active and well-regulated stock exchange, which means there are going to be lots of regulations we have to comply with by being a quoted organization. And they also require companies to prepare their statements in accordance with IFRS, the International Financial Reporting Standards. And that means that there are certain regulations and certain rules we must comply with, but it does make it quite easy, and it also makes it easier to expand to different countries. And that's something that often comes up as a potential option within the strategic case study, is expanding to different countries, is to taking what you have done so well within your domestic market and taking it over to different countries. And if you are preparing your financial statements in accordance with the International Financial Reporting Standards, it means that it is easier to do that, because you use the same setup, the same way of analyzing your statements, preparing your company accounts, your group accounts across the different markets in which you operate. It's not going to be a case if you're going to have lots of different systems. And that means you can also handle that more at your central head office as well. So that makes it easier to take advantage of that particular opportunity should it arise. I've also given the currency of the N dollar here. And whenever they give currencies and they talk about international financial reporting standards and potentials for overseas and international trading, is you need to think about currency risk as well. Not saying that's going to be a big part of it, but that is always a potential issue. That's one of the key parts of the F3 syllabus, and how you're going to deal with currency risk and how you're going to deal with exchange rate fluctuations, whether that's through leading and lagging payments, whether that's through netting, through domestic and home bank accounts, whether that is through various different futures and options contracts and forward contracts, all those different things that you learned in F3. Now, what I would say there is that you're not going to be expected to do lots of calculations in the strategic case study exam, because they already know you can do that. You did that at F3, they've tested that at F3. It's more just about knowing about them from a strategic perspective. Coming back to this, advising them on strategic matters. So the benefits of dealing with that currency risk and foreign exchange risk, and how it's all part of a general risk management strategy. So as we can see, lots of information just in those first 3 sentences. Some other things that I want to bring up before we finish this general introduction to the pre-scene video series is the development of heat pumps. Heat pumps are becoming very, very popular, and there is a lot of push, particularly in Europe, to replace gas boilers with these air source heat pumps. And the problem with that, though, is that they are very, very expensive. So heat pumps can cost up to £18,000 to install, and they also have a questionable sustainability, questionable reliability at this moment in time. And they don't necessarily always work as well in cold temperatures. So particularly for the UK, and even more so for Scandinavian countries, etc., there's a real issue that they may not work effectively. Also, unlike traditional gas boilers, they are very complex, very difficult to install, very difficult to maintain. And they're not actually carbon neutral. They're not net carbon zero, etc. All these different targets that are trying to be hit by different governments in Europe. So whilst they are more environmentally friendly than gas boilers, they are not absolutely environmentally friendly. However, they are cheaper to run in the long term, and they are generally considered to be safer, more environmentally friendly, even if they're not net zero. And they can also be used to cool as well as heat. So particularly given that there's been some issues with heat waves across Europe recently, that having a system that would be able to cool a property as well as heat a property would be advantageous. So of course, air conditioners, domestic air conditioners, are not used in Europe as much as they are in, or at least in Northern Europe, as much as they are in other places in the world, such as the US, where it's very standard to have a central air conditioner fitted into your property. So lots of key things to look at with regards to heat pumps and the difference between them and gas boilers. A few other things that we can think about, that we can infer just from knowing about the general environment, the general political environment at the moment. And what we're going to look at here is that there will be a big political issue here, particularly regarding legislation and the environment. And a key issue for the organization will be supply and demand for these air source heat pumps. And a figure I want to bring up here is that there is a push to have air source heat pumps installed in the UK, as they are more environmentally friendly, etc. But the current rate of supply, because they're so complicated to install, because there is a lack of qualified people to install them, because they're very complicated to create, etc., is that at the current rate, to meet the 2050 target that the UK has for installing heat pumps, for updating gas boilers to heat pumps, etc., is going to be missed by a long way, by a substantial margin. So the 2050 target, we're 2022 right now. So therefore, we have got 28 years to meet that target. At the current rate, it's going to take the UK 600 years to meet the heat pump target. So supply chains are going to be a big issue. There's clearly issues with the supply chain of the creation and installing of these heat pumps. So that's another key issue for you to look at here. So just summarizing some of those key risks and issues: environment, government targets, supply chain issues, the problems with heat pumps themselves, etc., and how they're not necessarily that good for the environment. They're better for the environment, but not necessarily good for them because of the refrigerant gases. So what we can see is there is a huge amount of information that we have been able to pull from these first introductory paragraphs, things that we can build on, develop, learn more about as we progress through the pre-scene, looking at the industry, looking at the risks facing the organization, and indeed the information about the organization itself. So thank you very much for watching this first video, and please join me for the next video where we're going to be looking at the market and the industry for domestic heating products. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and more importantly, you have found it useful. I'd like to just take a moment to tell you about some of the various different case study products that we produce here at Astranti and how they will help you to pass, minimize your study time, and represent good value for money. And all of these products are included on our case study course, but you can also purchase these products individually. And we have a range of different products, starting with our exam technique series. In this series of videos, and indeed a study text, we look through the approach to the case study exam, how best to approach it, how to plan your answers effectively, how to turn those plans into answers that are going to secure you the passing mark. We also have a video series looking at the theory revision, taking the key topics from the E3, P3 and F3 syllabus, looking at what those mean for the strategic case study as well, and also just giving you the chance to refresh your knowledge, particularly if it had been a while since you had looked at your strategic objective test papers. We then have the pre-scene analysis, detailing look at the pre-scene, looking through the pre-scene itself, but also looking at the strategic analysis, how the different models within the strategic syllabus apply to the pre-scene, and our top 10 most likely unseen issues. We also have an industry analysis document, which looks at the industry, details the industry, details the history of the industry, some of the key issues facing the industry, and major companies within that industry in the real world. It also has a series of important industry examples that you can use in your answers. We then have a series of mock exams that come with mock debrief videos looking at how you would answer this particular exam if you wanted that as your feedback. But we do have a marking and feedback option as well, which allows you to get your script marked, your mock exam marked by a trained marker that has experience marking both mock and real CIMA exams and providing a detailed feedback for you to improve and build upon your knowledge. We also have question packs that will give you lots of opportunity to write additional answers outside of the mock exams for very specific questions. So we've got lots of very, very specific broken down questions if you are struggling with a particular topic, with a particular competence, etc., that you can answer specific questions based on those to really improve your knowledge. And it's also just additional question writing practice. And we also have a series of masterclasses as well. These are live events where you will learn more about planning your answers, more about how to approach the exam, and also there'll be lots of very important hints and revision tips and other tips that will help you to pass this exam. And if you are purchasing all of these on the course, we also can offer what we call a double guarantee. And that is a 14-day money-back guarantee. So if you purchase the course and you're not satisfied, you can claim a full refund within 14 days. And we also have our pass guarantee. And this is where, as long as you have demonstrated that you have fulfilled the course requirements, such as watching all the videos, submitting all your mock exams, attending the master classes, and if you still do not pass the exam, we will give you another course for free as part of our pass guarantee. So thanks for watching. If you do have any other questions about the Astranti case study courses, please feel free to contact us and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And if you just have any general questions, then by all means email us and visit our website. So thank you for watching. I hope to see you on another video soon.